The emergency room at Landstuhl Regional Medical Center buzzed with controlled chaos. Dr. Sarah Chun had been working for 18 straight hours, her scrubs stained with evidence of the day's battles against death. Outside, the German winter wind howled, but inside the trauma bay, all that mattered was the steady rhythm of life-saving work. The doors burst open with a force that made everyone turn. Military personnel rushed in, carrying a stretcher that held a man whose life was slipping away with each labored breath. Blood soaked through multiple bandages across his chest and abdomen, and his face was pale as winter snow. "What do we have?" Sarah called out, her training taking over as she pulled on fresh gloves. "Commander Jake Morrison, Navy SEAL," the medic reported breathlessly. "Multiple shrapnel wounds from an IED blast in Afghanistan. Lost consciousness twice during transport. Blood pressure dropping fast." Sarah looked down at the wounded warrior before her. Even unconscious and fighting for his life, there was something unmistakably strong about him. His jaw was set with determination, as if he was willing himself to survive. Dark hair was matted with sweat and dust, and she could see old scars on his visible skin that told stories of previous battles. "Give me 2 units of O-negative stat," she ordered, her hands already examining the wounds. "And Prepper 3. We're going in now." The next 6 hours became a blur of surgical precision and stubborn hope. Sarah worked with the focus of someone who understood that failure was not an option. Each stitch, each careful movement of her instruments, was a step in the fight to bring Jake Morrison back from the edge of death. The shrapnel had done devastating damage. Pieces of metal had torn through muscle and dangerously close to vital organs. One fragment had missed his heart by mere millimeters. Another had nicked an artery that required delicate repair work. Sarah's hands moved with practiced skill, but her mind was fully engaged in the battle. "Doctor, his pressure is dropping again," the surgical nurse announced. "Not on my watch," Sarah muttered, her concentration absolute. She had lost too many good people on her table, and something about this particular patient made her even more determined than usual. Hours passed. The surgical team worked in synchronized harmony, each person understanding their role in this life-or-death drama. Sarah's mentor, Dr. Williams, assisted her, occasionally offering quiet guidance, but mostly watching with approval as his former student demonstrated the skills that had made her one of the best trauma surgeons in the military medical corps. "There," Sarah said finally, stepping back from the table. "That's the last fragment. How are his vitals?" "Stabilizing," came the relieved response from the anesthesiologist. "Blood pressure is coming back up." Sarah allowed herself one moment of satisfaction before moving into post-operative mode. "Let's get him to recovery. I want monitors on everything, and I want to be called if there's even the slightest change." In the recovery room, Sarah sat beside Jake's bed, reviewing his chart and watching the steady rise and fall of his chest. The surgery had been successful, but the next 24 hours would be critical. She had seen strong men recover from worse, and she had seen others slip away despite every medical intervention. "You're going to make it," she whispered to the unconscious patient. "You're too stubborn to give up now." As if responding to her words, Jake's eyelids fluttered. Sarah leaned forward, checking his pupils with a small flashlight. His eyes opened slowly, unfocused at first, then gradually finding her face. "Welcome back, Commander," she said softly, offering a tired smile. Jay tried to speak, but his throat was too dry. Sarah quickly brought a small cup of iced chips to his lips. After a moment, he managed to whisper, Did my team?" "Your team is fine," Sarah assured him, though she wasn't entirely certain. She had learned that sometimes hope was as important as medicine and healing. You just focus on getting better. Over the next several days, Sarah found herself checking on Jake more frequently than her other patients. She told herself it was because of the complexity of his injuries, but there was something more. During his lucid moments, they talked. She learned about his small hometown in Montana, his decision to join the Navy after September 11th, and his dedication to his team. Jake learned about Sarah's journey from a small town in California to medical school, her decision to join the military medical corps, and her unwavering belief that every life was worth fighting for. Despite the clinical setting and his serious condition, an easy rapport developed between them. You know, Jake said one afternoon, his voice stronger than it had been, "I've never had a doctor sit and actually talk to me like a person before." Sarah smiled, checking his bandages. "You've never had a doctor who pulled shrapnel from around your heart before either. Is that what happened?" Jake's hand moved instinctively to his chest. "Among other things," Sarah said, her expression becoming serious. "You were very close to not making it, Commander. Whatever was looking out for you that day was working overtime." Jake was quiet for a moment, then looked directly at her. "I think I know what was looking out for me." Their eyes met, and Sarah felt something shift between them. It wasn't appropriate for a doctor to feel this way about a patient, but there was an undeniable connection forming. She quickly looked away, focusing on her medical tasks. "Your recovery is remarkable," she said, keeping her voice professional. "If you continue progressing at this rate, we should be able to transfer you to Germany's medical facility for final recovery before you're cleared to return stateside." "What about you?" Jake asked. "Will you be staying here?" "I have orders for another deployment," Sarah replied. "I'll be heading to a forward operating base in Afghanistan in 2 weeks." Jake's expression darkened. "That's dangerous territory. Document. You need to be careful." Sarah appreciated his concern, but she had a job to do. "I became a military doctor to help people where help is needed most. The danger comes with the territory." On Jake's final day at Landstuhl, Sarah stopped by his room for one last check. He was dressed in clean fatigues, looking more like the formidable SEAL commander he was, and less like the broken man who had arrived on her operating table. "I wanted to thank you," Jake said, standing as she entered. "For everything. You saved my life." "I was just doing my job," Sarah replied, though they both knew it had been more than that. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out a small military challenge coin. "This is from my unit. I want you to have it." Sarah took the coin, feeling its weight in her palm. On one side was the SEAL trident. On the other was Jake's unit number and motto, "The only easy day was yesterday." "I'll treasure it," she said sincerely. Jake stepped closer, his voice dropping to almost a whisper. "Sarah, I know this isn't the time or place, and I know we barely know each other, but I need to say this. What happened between us here, these conversations, the way you fought for my life, it meant something to me." Sarah felt her heart racing, but she maintained her professional composure. "Jake, you're grateful because I helped save your life." "That's natural, but no," Jake interrupted gently. "It's more than that, and I think you know it too." Before Sarah could respond, Jake leaned down and kissed her forehead softly. "Take care of yourself out there. Document. The world needs more people like you." And then he was gone, leaving Sarah standing in the empty room, clutching the challenge coin and feeling as if something important had just walked out of her life. 2 days later, Sarah boarded a transport plane bound for Afghanistan, carrying with her the memory of dark eyes filled with gratitude and something deeper, and the weight of a challenge coin that represented a connection she couldn't quite define but couldn't forget. 3 years had passed since Sarah Chun last saw Jake Morrison, but the memory of those intense days at Landstuhl remained vivid in her mind. Now working as a trauma surgeon at San Diego General Hospital, she had transitioned from military medicine to civilian practice, though she still carried Jake's challenge coin in her pocket every day. Life had settled into a comfortable routine. Her apartment overlooking Mission Bay was a far cry from the austere military quarters she had called home for so many years. She had made friends among the hospital staff, dated occasionally, and even adopted a rescue dog named Scout. Yet something always felt incomplete, as if she was waiting for a chapter of her life that had been left unfinished. The emergency department on that particular Thursday evening was unusually quiet. Sarah was reviewing patient charts when her colleague, Dr. Martinez, approached with a concerned expression. "Sarah, we've got a situation. Multiple casualties coming in from a highway accident. Large vehicle collision with possible entrapment. ETA, 5 minutes." Sarah immediately shifted into emergency mode, gathering her team and preparing the trauma base. The familiar rush of adrenaline that came with life-or-death situations felt like coming home. No matter how much time passed, this was where she belonged. The ambulances arrived in a convoy of flashing lights and urgent voices. The first stretcher wheeled and carried a young mother who had been driving with her 2 children when a drunk driver ran a red light. The second held one of her children, a boy of about 8 who was conscious but clearly in pain. "Where's the other child?" Sarah called out as she began examining the mother's injuries. "Still trapped in the vehicle," one of the EMTs reported. "Fire department is working to extract her, but it's complicated. The car is unstable." Sarah's heart clenched. She knew that every minute counted when a child was trapped. How old? 4 years old. Conscious, but scared. They're trying to keep her calm while they work. For the next 2 hours, Sarah and her team worked frantically to stabilize the mother and son. The mother had internal bleeding that required immediate surgery, while the boy had a broken arm and severe lacerations that needed careful stitching. Throughout the ordeal, Sarah found herself thinking about the little girl still trapped at the accident scene. "Any word on the extraction?" she asked during a brief break between procedures. "They're having trouble," Dr. Martinez replied grimly. "The car shifted, and now they can't get the proper angle. They're calling in specialized rescue equipment." Sarah made a decision that surprised even herself. "I'm going to the scene." "Sarah, that's not protocol. The EMTs can handle field medicine. Not if that little girl has internal injuries that need immediate attention." "I'm going." 20 minutes later, Sarah found herself at one of the most chaotic accident scenes she had ever witnessed. Fire trucks, police cars, and ambulances created a maze of emergency vehicles. In the center of it all sat a crumpled sedan, its front end completely destroyed, with a small figure visible through the rear window. Sarah approached the fire chief, a grizzled veteran named Thompson who was coordinating the rescue effort. "I'm Dr. Chun from San Diego General. I'm here to assess the trapped victim." Thompson looked relieved. "Doctor, thank God. We've got a 4-year-old girl named Emma trapped in the back seat. She's conscious and talking, but we can't tell the extent of her injuries. The problem is, every time we try to extract her, the car shifts. We're afraid the whole thing could collapse." Sarah studied the situation. The car was precariously balanced, held up partially by the jaws of life and partially by what looked like pure luck. Getting Emma out safely would require someone small enough to crawl into the confined space and skilled enough to assess her condition under pressure. "I can fit through that gap," Sarah said, pointing to a small opening near the rear door. "If you can stabilize the vehicle for just a few minutes, I can get to her." "Doctor, if this car shifts while you're in there." "I understand the risks," Sarah said firmly. "But that little girl can't wait for a better option." Thompson nodded grimly and began coordinating his team. Sarah pulled on protective gear and crawled through the small opening into the destroyed vehicle. The smell of gasoline and twisted metal filled her nostrils, but her focus was entirely on the small girl sitting in her car seat. "Hi, Emma," Sarah said softly, offering a reassuring smile. "I'm Dr. Sarah. I'm here to help you." Emma's tear-streaked face turned toward her. "I want my mommy." "Your mommy is at the hospital getting better, just like we're going to make sure you get better too," Sarah said, gently examining the child for obvious injuries. "Can you tell me if anything hurts?" As Sarah worked, carefully checking Emma's vital signs and looking for signs of serious injury, she could hear the rescue workers outside discussing the increasingly unstable situation. The car groaned ominously, and she felt it shift slightly. "Doctor, we need to get you both out of there now," Thompson's voice called urgently. Sarah had found what she was looking for. Emma had a possible internal injury that needed immediate attention, but moving her incorrectly could cause more damage. She needed to immobilize the child properly before extraction. "I need 2 more minutes," Sarah called back. "Give me a pediatric spine board through this opening." The next few moments were some of the most intense of Sarah's career. Working in the cramped, unstable space, She carefully secured Emma to the spine board while the little girl whimpered softly. Every second felt like an hour as the car continued to groan and shift around them. "Okay, we're ready," Sarah finally called out. The extraction took place with military precision. Rescue workers carefully pulled Emma through the opening while Sarah guided from inside, ensuring that the child's spine remained stable throughout the process. Just as Sarah herself was being pulled free, the car's supports gave way, and the entire vehicle collapsed into the space where they had been working moments before. Sarah found herself on the ground beside Emma's stretcher, her heart pounding and her hands shaking slightly from the adrenaline. She had cut it closer than she ever intended, but Emma was safe. "That was either the bravest or the craziest thing I've ever seen a doctor do," said a familiar voice behind her. Sarah turned, and her world seemed to stop. Standing there in a fire department uniform, his helmet tucked under his arm and concern written across his face, was Jake Morrison. "Jake," Sarah whispered, barely believing her eyes. "Hello, Doc," Jake said, his expression mixing relief and amazement. "When I heard that a doctor had crawled into that car, I never imagined it would be you." The reunion was surreal, taking place amid the chaos of the accident scene with Emma's life still hanging in the balance. Sarah quickly refocused on her patient, directing Emma's transport to the hospital while her mind reeled from the unexpected encounter with Jake. "I have to go with her," Sarah told Jake as they loaded Emma into the ambulance. "I know," Jake replied. "I'll find you at the hospital." During the ride to San Diego General, Sarah worked to stabilize Emma while thoughts of Jake flooded her mind. What was he doing in San Diego? Why was he with the fire department? The questions would have to wait. Her young patient needed all her attention. Back at the hospital, Sarah spent the next 4 hours in surgery, repairing Emma's internal injuries. The operation was successful, and the little girl's prognosis was excellent. As Sarah finally emerged from the OR, exhausted but satisfied, she found Jake waiting in the hallway. He had changed out of his fire department gear into civilian clothes, and Sarah was struck again by how commanding his presence was. The years had been kind to him. He looked fit and healthy, with new lines around his eyes that spoke of someone who had seen both hardship and joy. "How is she?" Jake asked immediately. "She's going to be fine," Sarah replied, pulling off her surgical cap. "Full recovery expected." Jake's relief was visible. "Thank God. And thank you. What you did out there. I've seen a lot of brave people in my line of work, but that was something else." They stood there for a moment, the weight of 3 years of separation hanging between them. Finally, Jake spoke again. "Sarah, I know this is sudden, and I know we have a lot to catch up on, but would you like to get some coffee? I mean, if you're not too tired." Sarah looked at this man who had walked out of her life 3 years ago and somehow reappeared at exactly the moment when she needed to be reminded of what truly mattered. The coffee shop in the hospital lobby was nearly empty at this late hour, and they found a quiet corner table where they could finally talk. "So," Sarah said, wrapping her hands around her coffee cup, "fire department?" Jake smiled, and Sarah remembered how much she had missed that smile. "After I recovered from my injuries, I tried to go back to active duty, but something had changed. I kept thinking about what you said about helping people where help is needed most. When my military commitment ended, I came here to San Diego and joined the fire department. I've been doing rescue and emergency response for the past year." "That's quite a career change," Sarah observed. "Not really," Jake replied. "It's still about saving lives, just in a different way. What about you? How did you end up here?" Sarah told him about her transition from military to civilian medicine, about her apartment, and her dog, about the life she had built in San Diego. As they talked, she realized how easy it was to fall back into the comfortable rhythm of conversation they had shared in that German hospital room. "I never forgot you," Jake said suddenly, his voice serious. "I know that might sound crazy, but what happened between us at Landstuhl, it stayed with me." Sarah felt her heart racing again, just like it had 3 years ago. "Jake, I know it's complicated," he continued. "And I know we both have lives and responsibilities, but seeing you tonight Watching you risk your life to save that little girl, it reminded me of something I've been trying to ignore for 3 years. What's that? Jake reached across the table and gently took her hand. That some connections are too important to let go of. That some people are worth fighting for. Sarah looked down at their joined hands, feeling the same electricity she had felt years ago. The challenge coin in her pocket seemed to weigh heavier, as if reminding her of promises unspoken and possibilities unexplored. "I still carry your coin," she admitted quietly. Jake's eyes lit up. "Really? Every day," Sarah confirmed. "It's been like carrying a piece of that time with me, a reminder of something I couldn't quite define." They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, both of them processing the magnitude of this unexpected reunion. Finally, Jake spoke again. "Sarah, I don't want to make the same mistake twice. I let you walk away once because the timing wasn't right, and the situation was complicated. But life is always complicated, and timing is never perfect. What matters is that we're here, together, right now." Sarah felt tears forming in her eyes, emotion she had kept buried for 3 years finally surfacing. "I've thought about you every day since Landstall. I've wondered what might have happened if circumstances had been different. Maybe," Jake said softly, "we can find out." 2 years after their reunion at the accident scene, Sarah and Jake had built something beautiful together. Their relationship had developed slowly and carefully, both of them understanding the value of what they had found in each other. Jake had proposed 6 months earlier during a sunset walk on La Jolla Beach, presenting Sarah with a ring that incorporated a small piece of metal from the challenge coin she still carried every day. Now, as Sarah stood in the bridal suite at the historic Hotel del Coronado, surrounded by her closest friends and family, she could hardly believe this day had finally arrived. Her wedding dress was elegant, but simple, chosen because Jake had once mentioned he thought she looked most beautiful when she wasn't trying to impress anyone. "You look radiant," said her maid of honor, Dr. Martinez, who had become not just a colleague but a dear friend over the years. "I've never seen you this happy." Sarah smiled, touching the delicate necklace Jake had given her the night before. It held a small pendant engraved with the coordinates of the place where they first met and the place where he had proposed. "I feel like I've been waiting my whole life for this day, even before I knew what I was waiting for." Outside the window, she could see the beach where Jake had asked her to marry him. The Pacific Ocean stretched endlessly toward the horizon, and somewhere in her mind, she could picture that young SEAL commander being pulled from the battlefield, never knowing that his life was about to change in ways he couldn't imagine. A soft knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. "Come in," she called. To her surprise, it wasn't one of her bridesmaids, but Jake's father, retired Navy Captain Robert Morrison. The resemblance between father and son was striking, and Sarah had grown to love this man who had raised Jake with such strong values. "Sarah, I hope you don't mind the intrusion," Captain Morrison said, his voice carrying the same quiet authority that Jake possessed. "I wanted to speak with you before the ceremony." "Of course," Sarah replied, wondering what could be so important that it couldn't wait. Captain Morrison stepped into the room, closing the door behind him. In his hands, he carried a small wooden box that looked well-worn and treasured. "Sarah, I want you to know how grateful I am that my son found you," he began. "Jake has always been strong, but after his injuries, after what he went through in Afghanistan, there was something missing in him. When he came home, he was physically healed, but emotionally distant. Then, he met you, and everything changed." Sarah felt tears threatening to ruin her makeup. "He changed my life, too." "I know he did," Captain Morrison said with a gentle smile. "And that's why I wanted to give you this." He opened the wooden box to reveal an antique gold locket. "This belonged to Jake's grandmother, my mother. She was a Navy nurse during World War II, and she met my father when she helped treat him after he was injured in the Pacific Theater." Sarah gasped softly. "The story sounds familiar." "It should," Captain Morrison chuckled. "It seems the Morrison men have a tradition of falling in love with the women who save their lives. My mother wore this locket on her wedding day, and I had hoped that someday Jake would find someone special enough to carry on the tradition." With gentle hands, Captain Morrison fastened the locket around Sarah's neck. It settled perfectly next to Jake's pendant, as if it belonged there. "Welcome to the family, Sarah," he said, kissing her forehead in a gesture that reminded her so much of Jake that her heart swelled with emotion. After Captain Morrison left, Sarah stood in front of the mirror, touching both pieces of jewelry at her throat. The weight of family history and love felt like a blessing, connecting her not just to Jake, but to a legacy of strong couples who had found each other against all odds. The ceremony was held on the beach as the sun began its descent toward the Pacific horizon. Sarah had always dreamed of a beach wedding, and Jake had insisted that anywhere she wanted to marry him would be perfect. White chairs were arranged in neat rows on the sand, filled with their friends and family, fellow doctors and firefighters, and even some of Jake's former Navy SEAL teammates who had traveled from around the country to be there. As a string quartet began playing, Sarah's heart started racing with anticipation. Her father, a retired professor who had always been her biggest supporter, offered her his arm. "Ready, sweetheart?" Dr. David Chun asked his daughter. "More than ready," Sarah replied, taking a deep breath of the salt air. They began their walk down the sandy aisle, and Sarah's eyes immediately found Jake waiting for her at the altar. He stood tall and handsome in his dress blue uniform, looking every inch the Navy hero he was. But what took her breath away was the expression on his face as he watched her approach. It was the same look of wonder and gratitude he had worn when he first woke up in that German hospital room, but now it was mixed with pure joy and love. Beside Jake stood his best man, Chief Petty Officer Marcus Rodriguez, who had been his closest friend throughout his SEAL career. The rest of the wedding party included Sarah's closest friends from medical school, her colleagues from the hospital, and Jake's firefighter partner, who had become like a brother to him. As Sarah reached the altar, Jake stepped forward to take her hand from her father. The touch of his fingers sent the same electric current through her that she had felt that very first day in the trauma bay. "You look incredible," Jake whispered as they turned to face the officiant. The ceremony was conducted by Jake's former Navy chaplain, Commander Patricia Hayes, who had known Jake throughout his military career and had watched his transformation from wounded warrior to the man standing here today. "Dearly beloved," Commander Hayes began, her voice carrying clearly over the sound of gentle waves, "we are gathered here today to witness the union of two people whose love story began in the most unlikely of circumstances." She went on to tell the assembled guests about how Jake and Sarah had first met, about the near-fatal injuries that had brought them together, and about the years that had passed before they found each other again. As she spoke, Sarah could see guests wiping away tears, touched by the romantic journey that had led to this moment. When it came time for vows, Jake spoke first, his voice strong and clear despite the emotion Sarah could see in his eyes. "Sarah, 3 years ago, you saved my life in that operating room in Germany. But what I didn't realize then was that you would save it again and again in ways I never expected. You saved me from loneliness, from cynicism, from believing that I was meant to go through life alone. You showed me that strength isn't just about surviving battles. It's about opening your heart to love even when it feels dangerous." Jake paused, reaching into his pocket to pull out a familiar object. Sarah gasped when she saw it was his original challenge coin, the one he had given her years ago. "You kept this coin as a reminder of our connection," Jake continued. "Now I want to give it back to you, not as a memory of the past, but as a promise for the future. I promise to love you, to protect you, to support your dreams, and to build a life with you that honors both the people we were when we met and the people we've become together." Sarah could barely see through her tears as she began her own vows. "Jake, when I became a doctor, I took an oath to do no harm and to preserve life. I never expected that saving one life would change my own so completely. You taught me that healing isn't just about medicine. It's about connection, understanding, and love. You show me that the bravest thing we can do is not just survive our battles, but learn to trust and love after we've been broken." She took a shaky breath before continuing. "I promise to stand by your side through every challenge, to celebrate every joy, and to love you with the same determination I used to fight for your life that night in Germany. I promise to be your partner, your friend, and your home." When Commander Hayes pronounced them husband and wife, Jake's kiss was tender and filled with all the emotion of their long journey to this moment. The guests erupted in cheers and applause as the new Mr. and Mrs. Morrison turned to face their loved ones as a married couple. The reception was held in the hotel's grand ballroom, decorated with white flowers and soft lighting that created a magical atmosphere. During dinner, Jake's SEAL teammates shared stories that made everyone laugh, while Sarah's medical colleagues told tales of her dedication and skill that made Jake beam with pride. But the most touching moment came when little Emma, now 6 years old and fully recovered from her accident, walked up to the head table carrying a small bouquet of flowers. "Dr. Sarah," Emma said, her sweet voice, "Mommy says you saved my life, and now you're married to the firefighter who helped save me too. I wanted to give you these flowers to say thank you." Sarah knelt down to Emma's level, accepting the flowers and giving the little girl a gentle hug. "Thank you, sweetheart. You know what? You helped save my life too, because you brought Jake and me back together." As the evening continued with dancing and celebration, Sarah found herself constantly amazed by how perfectly everything had come together. Jake was an elegant dancer, leading her smoothly across the floor as they moved to their first song as husband and wife, At Last by Etta James. "No regrets?" Jake asked as they swayed together. "Only one," Sarah replied, smiling up at him. Jake raised an eyebrow in concern. "What's that?" "That it took us so long to get here," Sarah said, laughing at the relief on his face. Later that evening, as the reception wound down and guests began to say their goodbyes, Jake and Sarah found themselves alone on the hotel balcony overlooking the Pacific Ocean. The moon was full, casting a silver path across the water that seemed to lead directly to them. "Mrs. Morrison," Jake said, wrapping his arms around his wife from behind. "I like the sound of that," Sarah replied, leaning back against his chest. "I was thinking about something," Jake said softly, "about how many times our paths could have gone differently. If that IED had exploded a few inches closer, if you hadn't been on duty that night, if I hadn't joined the fire department, if that accident hadn't happened exactly when it did." Sarah turned in his arms to face him. "But all those things did happen exactly as they were supposed to. I think some connections are just meant to be, no matter how unlikely they seem." Jake smiled, reaching up to touch the locket at her throat. "My grandmother used to say that love finds a way, even when the path seems impossible." "She was a wise woman," Sarah said, thinking about the story Captain Morrison had told her about Jake's grandparents. "She would have loved you," Jake said with certainty. "She would have said you were exactly what the Morrison men needed. A strong woman who wasn't afraid to fight for what mattered." As they stood together on that balcony, looking out at the endless ocean under the starlit sky, Sarah thought about the incredible journey that had brought them to this moment. From a trauma bay in Germany to a beach in California. From two strangers thrown together by circumstance to two souls who had chosen to build a life together. Their story was proof that love could indeed conquer any obstacle. The challenge coin now rested in a place of honor in their new home, a symbol not just of their beginning, but of their commitment to face whatever challenges life might bring them together. And sometimes late at night, Sarah would hold it and remember that young SEAL commander fighting for his life, never knowing that he was fighting his way toward a love that would transform them both. Their love story had begun with Sarah saving Jake's life, but in the end, they had saved each other in all the ways that truly mattered.